Hello and welcome. I'm Joanna Williamson, a researcher at Cambridge Assessment. I'm going to talk about a research study I carried out with my colleague Matthew Carroll, looking at vocational, applied and technical qualifications in upper secondary education in England. This is the plan. I'll start with the context of research aims, then outline the data and approach used. I'll then move on to the research findings and finish with some conclusions and reflections. The most well-known upper secondary qualification in England is the A-level. These are academic qualifications usually taken by students in their final year of school, aged 17 to 18, and they're the most common university entrance qualification. They are far from the only qualifications available at this level, however. This slide shows just the most recent upper secondary qualifications, around since the year 2000, and only those at level 3, which is the standard level for this phase of post-16 education. Overall, upper secondary or Key Stage 5 education in England is characterised by having no discrete pathways, many qualifications, which can be formed into many combinations, and frequent reform. I've shown here the qualifications that have been removed or replaced recently. There are also many institution types, both state-funded and independent schools, for example, sixth form colleges and colleges of further education. These factors do complicate research efforts. What did we know before carrying out this study? Well, many previous studies had looked at students taking vocational and technical qualifications in the past, and commonly found patterns that include these shown on the left. Thinking about progression in particular, students with vocational and technical qualifications have often been found to progress to higher education at lower rates, particularly to higher status institutions and courses. There have also been widespread concerns about the extent to which vocational and technical qualifications supported other progression, concerns about the tracking or warehousing of young people on low-value courses that didn't support them into employment, training or further study. The limitations of these previous studies include that the findings often concern single qualifications rather than candidates' upper secondary programmes of study overall, and that many such findings relate to qualifications that have already been reformed, removed or replaced. Recent evidence challenges some of the previous findings. There are increasing numbers of higher education entrants who have taken an applied technical or vocational qualification, and vocational and technical qualifications are increasingly offered in schools and sixth form colleges, traditionally academic, as well as other institutions. Our concern was, how much do we actually know about how vocational, applied and technical qualifications are being used within upper secondary education at the moment? This becomes a pressing question because current policies in England are introducing some profound changes to technical education at this level. Recent changes have included the categorisation of existing qualifications from 2013 into these categories here on the left, and from 2014, reforms to the requirements for qualifications to be accepted within these categories. It's still the case, however, that candidates can currently assemble individual qualifications more or less how they choose, dependent only on the provision and timetabling of their school or college. From 2020, however, there are substantial changes planned. Students will instead follow discrete technical and academic routes at upper secondary. The academic route will consist of A-levels and other existing academic qualifications, with the explicit intention that students on this route will progress to higher education or to a form of higher education combined with an apprenticeship. The T-level route will consist of new technical qualifications called T-levels, not the same as tech levels, or an apprenticeship, with their own different intended destinations. The future of many qualifications in the current landscape, such as applied generals and tech levels, is unclear. To understand the implications of the forthcoming change, it seemed to us a matter of high priority to gain better understanding of current practice. Our research aims were to gain an up-to-date, detailed understanding of how vocational, applied and technical qualifications are being incorporated into students' upper secondary education, and to get an up-to-date, detailed look at the subsequent destinations of students holding these qualifications. For the really detailed analysis, we decided to focus on one particular family of vocational and technical qualifications, called Cambridge Technicals. Our two research questions were, firstly, how do Cambridge Technicals fit into upper secondary students' programmes of study? And secondly, where do students studying Cambridge Technicals progress to next? To address these questions, we carried out a descriptive analysis of the National Pupil Database, looking at data from 2012-13 up to 2015-16, which was the most recent year available at the point of this research. To look at progression from Cambridge Technicals, we linked the NPD data to the individualised learner record, that's information on further education and work-based learning, and to HESA data, that's information on higher education. Unfortunately, a key dataset about work destinations wasn't made available to us, so we couldn't consider progression into employment. We analysed only students who took at least one level 3, i.e. standard upper secondary level qualification. We grouped students according to cohort, that is, all those who turned 18 in the same school year. We categorised programmes of study into 5 pathways, according to the proportion of hours the students spent on different qualification types. And the 5 types were academic only, if more than 90% of learning hours were spent on solely academic qualifications, mostly academic, mixed, mostly vocational, and vocational only. We defined each student's main qualification to be the one from which they earned the highest number of university entrance, or UCAS, points. We summarised demographic characteristics of Cambridge Technicals candidates and compared to other student groups, and we calculated rates of progression to education and training destinations in the year after finishing up in secondary, and compared for different subgroups. Cambridge Technicals are available at 2 levels. They're available at level 3, the standard level of upper secondary qualifications, like A levels, and they're also available at level 2, a lower level, for students not yet ready for level 3 study. In the research overall, we looked at both level 2 and level 3, and at students of any age in upper secondary education. In the findings I presented today, I'm focusing just on level 3, standard upper secondary level, and on students finishing their upper secondary education aged 18. This is the normal school finishing age and includes the vast majority of young people. So moving on to our findings. In terms of which students included Cambridge Technicals within their upper secondary education, we found some similarities with findings from the literature on VTQ uptake. There were more male than female students, unlike in A levels, and there was evidence of highly gendered routes. In IT, 31.3% of Cambridge Technicals candidates were female, whilst in health and social care over 90% were female. There was overrepresentation of candidates from industrialised areas, such as the northeast of England. However, we also found differences from the trends reported in previous literature. Candidates were middle attaining relative to their school cohort, and candidates were most likely to be studying in schools rather than FE colleges. And candidates tended to be average in terms of socio-economic status. In terms of how the Cambridge Technical qualification fitted into students' overall programmes of study, the first thing to note is that some students took multiple Cambridge Technicals. This slide shows the most common combinations of Cambridge Technicals taken by cohort, counting all technicals that the student took during upper secondary education. The most common by far was a single introductory diploma, equivalent in hours and university entrance points to an A level, and the next most common, and the most common combination, including more than one, was a level 3 certificate followed by a level 3 introductory diploma. The findings suggested that the taking of multiple Cambridge Technicals was used to structure progression within upper secondary education. 85% of those who took multiple Cambridge Technicals took multiple in the same subject, rather than gaining breadth from multiple subjects. Furthermore, they tended to take them in a particular way. Over 90% of those who took a pair of Cambridge Technicals in the same subject took the smaller qualification at age 16-17 and the larger one a year later, at age 17-18. This seemed to strongly mirror the pre-reform practice of AS and A levels, structuring students' progression within upper secondary education. This pattern didn't occur for the students taking multiple technicals in different subjects. These were usually both taken at age 17-18 in the final year of school. This slide shows the uptake of all other qualifications by Cambridge Technicals candidates. Just under half also took an AS level, and almost as many an A level. This slide lists the most common overall combinations of qualifications for Cambridge Technicals candidates, considering only those at level 3. Taking AS or A levels alongside Cambridge Technicals accounted for 35% of candidates. And it should be noted that whilst many of these combinations include AS and A levels, there are also many taking only applied and technical qualifications here too. When we look at how the overall pathways of the Cambridge Technicals candidates were classified, as shown in the top bar here, There was a fairly even split between candidates on mostly academic, mixed, mostly vocational and vocational pathways. In other words, the qualification combinations shown on the previous slide amount to inclusion of Cambridge Technicals within a pretty wide range of overall programmes. Among upper secondary students overall, in the lower bar, over half were following a purely academic pathway, usually A-levels. Since AS and A-levels alongside technicals accounted for such a large proportion of candidates, we had to look at exactly how many A-levels and technicals such students typically included. The largest subgroup took 1 technical and 2 A-levels. This accounted for 31% of those combining technicals with AS and A-levels in 2015-16. The programmes of study did vary by student and centre characteristics. Here, for example, we see the overall combinations of qualifications split by the candidate's prior attainment group. The dark blue section at the bottom of each bar represents those who took AS and A-levels only, alongside technicals. This proportion increased with increasing prior attainment. The beige section at the top of each bar represents those who took no other level 3 qualifications alongside their technicals, and this decreased with increasing prior attainment. Note that no other level 3 qualifications could mean a full timetable of level 3 technicals, or that the student took very few qualifications, or that their other qualifications were all at lower levels. So moving on to the findings about subsequent progression. This slide shows the classification of student destinations in the year after they finished upper secondary education. The 5 destinations we were able to capture were, firstly, a higher education course, secondly, a higher education course within a further education-based apprenticeship, thirdly, a further education-based apprenticeship that did not involve a higher education course, fourthly, any other education destination, and finally, no known education destination. This slide shows the distributions of university entrance points achieved by Cambridge Technicals candidates, according to their average grade on their Cambridge Technical qualifications. I've marked on here with the horizontal dotted lines the entrance requirements for a number of higher education courses in relevant subject areas. What this slide shows is that typical achievement by Cambridge Technicals candidates was sufficient for entry to a number of higher education courses in relevant areas. For example, a Bachelor of Science in Nursing at the University of Bedfordshire. This slide shows the proportion of students who progressed to each destination. The bars in orange represent students without a Cambridge Technical, and the bars in purple represent students who took at least 1 Cambridge Technical. Rates of progression for students with a Cambridge Technical were slightly lower to higher education, were slightly higher to further education-based apprenticeships, and were otherwise similar. For interest, it's worth noting that the gap in the rate of progression to higher education narrows slightly when older students are included, like this. After looking at overall rates of progression, we of course looked at various breakdowns by subgroups. This chart shows destinations reported according to the student's main qualification, the one in which they achieved the largest number of university entrance points. The graph shows only qualifications which were the main qualification for at least 2,000 students. This chart shows that around 40% of students whose main qualification was a Cambridge Technical progressed to higher education. This rate was lower than for students whose main qualification was an applied A-level, but higher than for students whose main qualification was a BTEC. Students whose main qualification was a Cambridge Technical were more likely to progress to an FE-based apprenticeship than students whose main qualification was an applied A-level or BTEC. This chart shows destinations according to students' upper secondary pathway, and whether this pathway included a Cambridge Technical or not. A couple of interesting points to note are, firstly, for students on mixed or vocational pathways, those holding Cambridge Technicals progress to higher education at higher rates than those without Cambridge Technicals. Next, for students on other pathways, rates of progression to higher education were similar for students with and without Cambridge Technicals. And finally, there was some progression to all of the destinations from each of the pathways. Looked at in this way, the lack of variation is the striking thing. This slide now shows the destinations for Cambridge Technicals candidates only, according to their overall qualification combination. Cambridge Technical students who also took AS and A levels, the top bar in the chart, were the most likely to progress to higher education, around 46% did, and rates of progression to higher education for Cambridge Technical students without AS and A levels were substantially lower, in the range 23 to 36%. Moving to the conclusions now. Firstly, our findings showed some similarities with previous findings about who includes vocational and technical qualifications in their overall programme of study. There were more male students, there were highly gendered routes, and higher uptake in industrialised regions. However, it's important to emphasise that candidates were middle attainers and were most likely to be studying in schools. Our second main conclusion was that candidates included Cambridge Technicals in a wide range of different overall programmes, ranging from mostly academic, i.e. at least 90% of learning hours in academic qualifications, to entirely vocational or technical. In particular, the findings emphasise that academic versus technical are inadequate labels for describing current use and practice, and that many candidates were taking AS and A levels alongside Cambridge Technicals, especially at higher attainment levels. Finally, our findings showed that progression from Cambridge Technicals was good relative to similar qualifications, both for university entrance and in particular for work-based learning. Students from all pathways progressed to all destinations, though in differing proportions. Thank you for listening. If you have questions about the research, you can reach me at this email address on screen or browse our Research Division homepage.